So we're talking today about business transparency, and Deepika, this is something that we're increasingly seeing in the headlines, whether it's corporate scandals or the ongoing debate about gender pay. But what exactly do we mean by business transparency, and could you tell us some of the areas that businesses are required to report on?
Sure. So business transparency is essentially the publication of what would have been internal private business data, and the purpose of requiring businesses to publish that data is explicitly to change corporate behaviours around that particular action. So we're seeing it increasingly as a worldwide trend, but it's something that the UK government is really focused on. And there's four main areas that we've started seeing this kind of data disclosure requirements. First, as you mentioned, workplace transparency, particularly around pay inequality. So you mentioned the gender pay gap. Secondly, around supply chains, the requirement on companies to publish a transparency in supply chains report, to report on the payment terms to suppliers. Thirdly, around ownership. So we're seeing requirements to publish the beneficial ownership information of various asset classes. And fourthly, around environmental impact, so energy usage, greenhouse gas emissions, and so forth.
And one of the interesting things about from a regulatory point of view, about how these regimes work is that unlike things like the GDPR, they're not based on huge fines for non-compliance. So what are the drivers that are forcing businesses to comply with these regimes?
Well, firstly, reputation. The government has been explicit about saying that once this data has been published, they're expecting civil society organisations, NGOs, and particularly the media to use that data, publish that data, and through that visibility, change behaviours. So, for example, with the gender pay gap, we saw that the BBC embedded a tool on their website so you could search any organisation and immediately get a snapshot of the gender pay gap in that organisation and how they were performing against their peers. Similarly, with supply chains, there are data services that analyse that information, and again, businesses can immediately see how their suppliers are performing, how their peers are performing. And of course, we've all seen how adverse media reports affect brand value. So the link between reputation and value is really a key driver.
So if that's really the key driver, if it's about reputation and brand, does this mean that this is really only relevant to consumer-facing businesses, or is it more widely relevant to other businesses?
It's definitely not just consumer-facing businesses. Transparency data is now being used increasingly to evaluate and compare businesses in a whole range of areas. Investors are increasingly looking at ESG measures when they come to making their investment decisions, and we've got a future video exploring that particular facet of transparency, so look out for that. Also, increasingly, procurement decisions are being based on transparency information. So, you know, if your payment to suppliers terms don't fit certain parameters, then you're automatically excluded from certain bids. And lastly, we're seeing employees as a major stakeholder group looking at transparency data. And in the competition for talent, the data that's been published is a real differentiator.
And I suppose naturally a lot of businesses will be looking at this from a compliance point of view and looking at the minimum requirements for transparency and the risks if they get it wrong. But what are the business benefits of really engaging with these issues?
There are loads of positives actually, and if you're a business that engages now, you're staying ahead of the trend, you're going to be a leader in your sector, and you're really going to reap the rewards of the enhanced value and better stakeholder relationships that are going to be built.
And you've mentioned that already we have regimes around transparency in supply chain, around corporate ownership, around gender pay. Is there anything else that's on the horizon that businesses can expect to be seeing coming into focus in the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, so on the workforce side, ethnicity pay reporting is coming in, and there's a consultation out about that at the moment. So that will come into force in the next few, 12 or so months. Also next year, pay ratio reporting. So listed companies are going to have to start reporting on the pay ratios between their CEO and their average worker. So that's going to throw out some really interesting data. And then on the ownership side, we're going to see beneficial ownership registers for foreign holders of UK property. So that's going to be a massive shake-up for the UK real estate sector, particularly investment in UK real estate, because that piece of legislation does actually have real teeth. Foreign owners won't be able to buy and sell property until they register who's the person actually behind that entity. So I'm sure we're going to see some eye-catching headlines about the percentage of UK land owned by nationals from X or Y country.
So a lot to think about and a lot on the horizon. What can businesses be doing now to make sure that they're able to cope with what's coming down the line?
So firstly, make sure that you know what's coming. Quite a lot of these pieces have a long lead-in time, so you can really make sure that you're aware of what's coming and that you've got enough time to prepare in your business. And at Osborne Clarke, we've got a transparency hub on our website, so you can always keep up to date by following that, or feel free to contact us directly and we can tell you what's relevant particularly to your business and your priorities. Secondly, get your house in order. Do you have systems and processes for collecting the data? There are some really cool tech tools that can be used for data analytics. So start exploring those. Do you have someone who's got overall responsibility, or is this all sort of compartmentalised around your business? If it is compartmentalised, start bringing it together and make sure there's coordination between HR, compliance, legal, commercial arms, so that you're just working much more efficiently and have got a streamlined process. And lastly, also think about PR strategy. If there is data that's going to be published that's needs to be presented to your stakeholders in a particular way, make sure you're ahead of that. Again, we've got video coming up about that sort of practical global compliance processes that businesses can be putting into place, so look out for that too.
Topeka, thanks very much.